Tonight I am out for a walk in the beautiful countryside where I live. Now, I started walking from my house and my plan is to go all the way down to the river. But only one of those things is true. The other one is just a prediction. You see, I definitely started walking from my house. That's a fact. But going to the river? That's only probable. Now, at first it might seem very basic and obvious that the past is true and the future is uncertain, but realizing that talking about the future is just about making predictions is the key to understanding the future tense in English. Here is a small selection of books that try to explain the future tense in English in their own unique way. But they all have one thing in common. Lists. Lists of rules about the future tense for you to memorize. Now, I hate lists. I think there's no faster way to turn somebody off learning anything than giving them a huge list of stuff to memorize. I don't think it's fun, and I definitely don't think it's effective. You know what I like? I like logic, because language is a lot of things. Language might be chaotic, and it might be random, but it's never illogical. And so I'm going to show you the logic behind the way we use the future tenses in English. And you will finally understand really the difference between will and going to. So now we are going to take this idea that talking about the future is just about making predictions and combine it with our knowledge of the English system of verbal tenses to create a logical explanation of talking about the future in English. The first way to talk about the future is using the present simple. Now, let's think about what we use the present simple for in English. We use it to talk about things that are true and facts, things that don't change. For example, I am Australian. I love pizza. And so when we use the present simple to talk about the future, we are making predictions based on fact, based on things that are true, things that are not likely to change. For example, the train leaves at 6 and it is my birthday tomorrow. Both of these are examples of things that are normally always true, that are very unlikely to change. The next way to talk about the future is using the present continuous. And here I am including both the present continuous with all verbs and to be going to. Now, what do we use the present continuous for in English? We use it to talk about things that are in progress now, things that are happening in or around this time. So, when we use the present continuous to talk about the future, we are making predictions based on things that are happening now. For example, I am eating pizza tonight. It's a plan that I've made. You are going to love Italy because we are talking about your trip to Italy that you're going on next week. Now, I know what you're thinking. Christian, the future is always based on things that are happening now. You're absolutely right. There are no restrictions on this. If you want to use the present continuous to always talk about the future, go ahead. You would always be correct. The final way to talk about the future is using will. But before I go into the details, there's something very important you need to know. Now, most people, when they think of the word will, they think about the verb, that modal verb that helps us to talk about the future. In fact, will is the most common modal verb in all of English. But will is also a noun. Let me read its definition. A legal document containing instructions as to what should be done with one's money and property after one's death. So when we use will to talk about the future, we are making a prediction based on our intentions, our desires, what we want to happen in the future. For example, I will be president, and they will help us. So there is actually this restriction on the use of will. You won't hear native speakers using will constantly because it just seems unnatural to constantly be making predictions about the future based on your intentions or wants or desires. Normally, when we are talking about the future, we are making other types of predictions. So that should be it, right? I have shown you the logic behind all of the ways that we talk about the future. That's the future done and dusted. But what about this eternal question of the difference between will and going to? Well, I showed you the logic about predictions in the future, but there is another type of logic in language that comes in and it forces native speakers to bend the rules. Now, language is not just about vocabulary, it's also about other things. So sometimes will and going to can be used interchangeably. Let me explain. Now, there's the question of speed. So when native speakers are speaking, they want to use the language as quickly as possible. So you will find that, especially in negatives and questions, will is more common because it's faster. Imagine if I want to use the negative of to be going to. So, you are not going to go to the party? Or I could say, you won't go to the party, which is only one syllable. The next thing is style. We have the difference between formal and informal styles, among other types of styles. And the research has shown that will is much more common in writing, and the present continuous is much more common in speaking. So it seems that we consider will to be something more formal. So there's that. And then finally, content. Imagine that we are using the third conditional, a very complicated conditional structure. Now, we already have a lot of information to process in a very long conditional. And by using a very long way to talk about the future, like to be going to, it makes that content of that conditional structure even more complicated. So we're more likely to use will in a conditional because, again, it's shorter. It makes it more simple to process. The truth is that linguists have looked for explanations about the difference between will and going to for at least 100 years. But nobody has ever really been able to come up with a true, precise definition and explanation, because we have sometimes these logics colliding. And that's why I always tell my students, there's no difference between will and going to. Just use whichever one you want. Well, in the end, I didn't make it down to the river. There was this guy with a dog, and then I had a beer, and it just... I'm not very good at making predictions about the future. Well, I hope that you found this class interesting. If you would like to see any more classes about the English language, then don't forget to subscribe. I'm Christian, this is Canguro English. I'll see you in class.